this is the good problem of absentee and provisional ballots and all this early voting. So we had so much early voting, so many absentee and provisional ballots, that they all can't be counted by the time the precincts close, by the time the elections are over. And so what that means is that if you're polling at a certain percentage, you think you might gain more from those absentees, then you're not going to concede, or you don't want to call the election thinking that you might be able to take more in. We generated more money in this campaign. It was the most expensive Georgia race in the history of American politics. It's very close. We can no longer consider Georgia a red state. People were saying this in 2016. It didn't turn out to be the case, but in the 2 years since, definitely so. It's not really the state, it's the metropolitan area. So in this election, Savannah, Augusta, and Atlanta all went for Stacey Abrams. So that just shows the urban-rural dichotomy that exists traditionally in American politics. What's to pay close attention to for especially 2020 is that the blue zone around Atlanta, the mostly Democratic, heavily 70-30 zone, is expanding and expanding and expanding and expanding as Atlanta grows. And as that happens, more people that are Democrats are going to be included in the elections and vote. And pretty soon, you're likely to have a Democratic governor. If it doesn't happen this time, next time around, and probably more 50-50 split in the state legislature as well as Congress. What we have now with the rise of the new blue, is what I call it, is this far left, or at least progressive, which Stacey Abrams fits into. She certainly, she purposely ran on a progressive card to be not as radical as Republicans label her, but to be on the left, to see if she could attract people that don't typically show up. It was the Trump's campaign strategy, but she used it for the Democrats. I'm going to be as progressive as possible in a recently traditionally red state to see who shows up that doesn't usually show up. And it turns out that it worked for her. I haven't seen the numbers yet. I don't think they're released, but I'm sure she got the millennial vote. I'm sure she got underrepresented votes. I'm sure she got the women vote. So that's a huge, at least in the urban areas. And if the trends for the Republicans losing a lot of these congressional seats, I wouldn't be surprised if she got most of the suburban areas as well, because that's how the Democrats flipped the House of Representatives, is by getting the suburban. Usually solidly red areas went for the Democrats this time around. There were some discrepancies with with some precincts, with the machines not working properly, with an inadequate low number of machines being sent to high voter districts, high voter precincts, which, let's give people the benefit of the doubt, could be just overlooking it or something. But if that affected voter turnout, or as Stacey Abrams says, voter suppression, that would be a reason for a lawsuit, or at least to draw attention to it. As Secretary of State, if he even addresses that, that just opens it up for people to say, this is what happened, you knew about it, you're talking about it, why didn't you do anything about it? So he has to be very careful about how he doesn't want to gray the lines between candidate Kemp running for governor and Secretary of State Kemp. This is a problem, and I hope the next legislative session we look into this, that you cannot be in charge of the elections, because I don't want to speak badly of Kemp, so let's not say, oh, he might be unethical, but it does not allow him to assuage voters' concerns that as Secretary of State, nothing went wrong, that the elections ran smoothly, because he might open himself up to legal precedent if he does that.
Right.
And who's speaking, candidate Kemp or Secretary of State Kemp? So it's a can of worms. Yeah, he has a small body that helps him, and he's not the sole person in charge as Secretary of State, so it's not him being a tyrant or a dictator in the state of Georgia. Right. There's a small committee, a small group of individuals that would help him make these decisions, that would hold him accountable, and there is some transparency there. So there's a lot of fear-mongering by the left saying that he controls all this. It's not that simple. He does have a lot of power, but there are people there to hold him accountable in that situation. He does, however, have power to review a situation and say, we need to make changes. We need to make sure that this doesn't happen in the future. But to give a little balanced take on this without trying to be partisan one way or another, I don't think anybody could have expected the turnout we had, period. I mean, that was just massive turnout. 60% of Georgia voters turned out to vote. 60%. That's matches, if not higher, than presidential elections. Never happens. Traditionally, you're talking about 20 to 40% in a midterm election. 60%. I mean, every record we had was blown away by this election. Wow. Every record.
think that's it. Do you anything else we need to talk about?
I know it's not important to Georgia, but Texas looks like it's in a no man's land as well.
Really?
So
I thought Ted Cruz won outright.
he did, but if you look at the way the counties are shifting and everything, I bet in the next 10 years, Texas becomes purple, just like Georgia's going through the process, if not Democratic completely by 2024, the next presidential election after 2020.
How? Austin? Houston?
In Dallas and all the Hispanics,
San Antonio?
yep, and all the Hispanics coming in, voting heavily Democratic. And this may be one instance where Trump hurt the Republicans by focusing on immigration rather than focusing on the spectacular economy we're living in.
Yeah.
So by him doing that, he could have scared more immigrants to vote for Beto in Texas and for Democrats. They won a couple of congressional seats as well. So that's something to watch. And then one more thing that, because I'm a political junkie that I can't help, the Democrats won major governor seats in all the Rust Belt states that Trump won that propelled him to the presidency. So Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, the states that Trump won, what handed him the presidency, they now control the governorship, which means they get to dictate the terms of the election for 2020, which means the states that Trump relied on to get him in the White House can no longer be counted as even favorable to Republicans in 2020. Major political shifts. That's probably the most underspoken point of this election, is that they won not just a few more governorships than most people thought, but the Democrats won seats that are explicitly important for the 2020 presidential election. That's so far away, people aren't thinking about it, but they just won those states that carried Trump to the presidency, which means nobody can count on that being there for the Republicans the next time.